A lot of science owes its existence to religion, which is something people don't think about often, but a lot of our early scientists were literally full-time members of clergy. Clergymen used to be the scientists.
Hello, my name is David Kaplan. I'm here today to talk about science and Judaism.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Yechiel Krish. I live in Pomona, New York. Right now, I write about science. I've been writing about science for many years for various audiences. At the moment, I'm a press officer at the Rockefeller University, where we have something like 70 biomedical labs. And I'm also an ordained rabbi working with the Chabad movement.
Well, will you just comment on the connection between science and Judaism?
Absolutely. Judaism, Torah, let's call it Torah. The Torah itself is the blueprint of the universe. Because it's the blueprint of the universe, everything that's in our physical universe is going to be based on the Torah. Science is the study of that blueprint. So if we are studying the blueprint, which is the Torah, through science, we have scientists looking at the world and observing, and what they find will inevitably always, if it's done correctly, match the Torah perfectly. Because science is describing something that the Torah is stating. The Torah tells us a truth, and science consistently backs it up.
A lot of scientific discoveries in recent years had been either directly or indirectly referenced in the Torah and a lot of our Jewish holy books. Will you comment on that phenomenon and actually cite some specific examples?
Maimonides, Rambam, he gives a measurement of the size of the sun. And for generations, we thought it was wrong because it doesn't sound right. He gives a relative measurement of the sun, saying the sun is a certain size bigger than the planet Earth. And the number doesn't work. Now what we know about astronomy is that the number is way off. This is not the size of the sun. The sun's a lot bigger than Rambam thought it was. So for a while, people thought that he was just out of his mind. Now that we understand how the corona of the sun works, though, and how projections off of the corona work, when we measure the corona, that is the area around the sun, when we measure what the sun would be if you count the extent of how far it can go, it comes down almost exactly to Rambam's measurement. So a lot of times, the more we study, the more science we learn, the less we see the contradictions. There was certainly a time where Torah and science didn't line up at all in the early days of science. And what's really happened is Torah hasn't changed at all. Science has caught up. We used to think that medicine could be done a certain way. We used to believe that evidence wasn't necessarily all that necessary. The early days of science, good evidence collection, putting things in books, the system of one scientist talking to another to work out problems, these are ideas that were somewhat alien to science until the 1700s or the late 1600s, maybe the 1500s if we're starting from Copernicus. These are ideas that go back all the way to the beginning of the Talmud. So certainly the basis of science is very much something that a Talmudic scholar would look at and say, that's exactly what we think, and that a secular scholar might not have agreed with until around the year 1500. So we certainly are far ahead in the scientific method.
Earlier you stated that the Torah is the blueprint of the universe. And so what can science learn from the Torah?
Science can learn the truth from the Torah. There's a classic example from the Indian subcontinent, which is that you take a blindfolded person and you have him walk around an elephant, and you ask him what is he dealing with. So the blindfolded person will feel the trunk and think it's one thing, the tail and think it's a different thing. And as he walks around the elephant, if he's allowed to keep circling and keep feeling, and he's got a brain, he will eventually figure out that it's an elephant. This is the scientific approach, this is evidence, and it does work. It works incredibly well. Science is very well founded on very seriously good principles. Science works, it really does. And if we didn't believe it worked, the Torah wouldn't give so much authority to it. The Torah says, for example, Nitin Rishus l'Roifeh l'Rapes. A doctor is given authority to heal. The Torah trusts doctors. The Torah trusts science in a big way because evidence collection is so well done. You keep circling that elephant over and over again. At the same time, the Torah sometimes says, this is an elephant, in which case, no matter how many times I circle it, I'm not going to get any further than the Torah. And as a matter of fact, sometimes a scientist will, if you'll follow my metaphor, circle the elephant again and again and conclude that it is a walrus. And there the Torah says, no, it's an elephant. And science goes, look, I circled, it's definitely a walrus. Good for you, but it's an elephant. So the Torah has the final bottom line on some issues. What's kind of incredible is that the Torah doesn't have the bottom line on a lot of issues. The Torah doesn't tell us most things that we're studying in science. The Torah tells us how old the world is, how old the universe is. But a lot of science, the Torah doesn't say anything. And there, the best method that we have is evidence, is scientific evidence. So when the Torah speaks, science should listen. When the Torah doesn't speak, our best approach is to listen to the science.
Let's talk about some issues that might appear to be incongruous, like the age of the universe.
Classic.
It's a classic. So the Judaism says one thing, and it appears science says another thing, but actually they may be saying the same exact thing. Would you please talk about that point?
Sure. We have, as I see it, 4 options every time Torah and science conflict. Only 4. Maybe you can find another one, but I've only counted 4. And that is that we can twist Torah into a pretzel, because we assume that science is right and therefore Torah is archaic and should be wrong. One approach is we say Torah didn't really mean it. When God said he made the world in 6 days, he was joking. God tells funny jokes. So one approach is to twist the Torah into a knot. Another approach is we could twist science into a knot. We say Torah is true, but science is just like 5 guys in a basement trying to figure things out. What do they know? Obviously, as you can tell from my tone, I don't particularly appreciate either approach. I don't like a sacrifice of science or Torah, but there are approaches that you'll find that people have used effectively. The twist of the Torah and the twist of science. A third approach that's become very popular in recent years is the Kabbalah approach. I have a fourth approach, which is the one that I use, and I think it's faithful to a lot of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's letters on the topic, which is that once we recognize what Torah does best and what science does best, we usually don't find contradictions between them. There's a certain synthesis.
In recent years, science has settled on a number which I'm not...
About 13.7 billion seems to be the fad at the moment.
Right,
it's always
right.
hovering around 14, but
right.
the most recent data, I think 13.7.
Okay, 13.7. 13.7 billion. And Judaism says God created the world in...
5,783.
Well, God created the universe in 6 days.
6 days,
rather than
and
7.
it's been around for about 6,000 years.
It's been around for 6,000 years.
Yeah.
So around for 6,000 years versus 13.7 billion.
So you can immediately see the common ground, right? We just want to just split the difference.
That seems to be incongruous.
Oh,
What
yeah.
is Judaism's explanation for the separation here?
So we can do all 4 approaches, right? All 4 approaches do exist in the literature and are valid approaches.
Which is the one you prefer?
Oh, definitely the fourth.
Well, let's hear your thoughts.
You want to hear my thoughts?
Please.
Sure. So you don't want to hear the other ones. Do you believe that God split the sea?
The Red Sea?
Yeah, the Red Sea when we left Egypt.
Yeah.
Great. I think most Jews believe that. I do. I think most Jews believe that God split the sea. Do you believe in the basics of water chemistry? Now, I know you probably don't necessarily know all the basics of water chemistry.
Remember I said I got a D in C's and D's in
That's right.
chemistry.
But the basics of it, if I told you the water chemists have come up with a conclusion, would you broadly support their conclusions?
If you said that, then I would believe it.
There we go. I think you probably know that it would violate all of the rules of hydrogen bonding and water chemistry that water can split in half. Water can't split. And even if water can split because a tsunami comes and draws the water straight out of the ground, the Red Sea was the Sea of Reeds, is opportunistic splitting. The moment the Egyptians are about to catch us, the sea splits. There is no chemical explanation for that. And the ground was dry. By Yabasha, it says in the Torah. They walked on dry ground. No way science does that either. This is an absolute violation of several laws of physics, several laws of chemistry. It's a big problem. How do people believe that? What do they do with that? What do you do with it?
With the violation of the...
Yeah, how do you believe in the splitting of the
you're
sea?
asking me?
Yeah.
I mean, to me...
God split the sea, violates science. What do you do?
God creates the rules. Now, he mostly wants to follow the laws of nature, which he created, but sometimes he can go off the script if he wants to.
Exactly. That's my approach. My approach is, it's exactly my approach. Couldn't have said it better myself, but I'll try. My approach is that science describes the steady state of the world when God is not performing miracles. Sometimes God performs a miracle, and he breaks that steady state. The reason why I like this approach so much is because I think we all kind of intuitively believe it too. Anybody who believes in miracles and understands some science believes that science is describing the steady state of nature the way God made it, and that it doesn't vary very much, but that God has the authority to come in and smash the whole thing and do a miracle. And that a miracle is essentially when science goes offline for a few minutes, right? Mm-hmm. So, how long would the universe have taken to make if God had not intervened with a miracle? How long does it take matter to turn into this room and me and you? And the answer is, I believe firmly, about 14 billion years. Is that 14 billion years is how long it takes to make a universe from scratch. And that 4.5 billion years is about how long it takes to make a world from scratch. That's the approximate age of the planet. But God tells us in the Torah that he did not do that. He made a miracle. He says, Breishis bara Elokim, Esa Shamayim ve'esa Aretz. I made a miracle and I did it faster. God's very fast. He can do miracles. I believe that God made the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th, and that the world is only about 6,000 years old, but that's not how you make a world. So science is describing what would have happened had God not made a miracle, but God did make a miracle. In this way, the beauty and the power of this method, is that it doesn't take anything away from the scientific discoveries. You can 100% believe in and work with biogeochronology. You can work with the ages of rock formations. You can work under the assumption that we're dealing with what a world would have done had God not sped it up. But at the same time, there's no violation of Torah whatsoever. The Torah says that this is how old the world is, it's how old the world is. The power of the approach is that we haven't twisted Torah, and we haven't twisted science. Because science doesn't claim to describe a miracle, and the Torah doesn't claim to be describing a steady state.
So let's tackle another issue.
Sure.
Let's tackle another issue, which is evolution. What would you say is Judaism's take on the theory of evolution?
Depends on what part. So we have a couple different kinds of evolution. We have microevolution. We have speciation. These are things that we can see in the lab. So if you watch a bacterium, that's the singular, you can watch it evolve. We have seen bacteria evolving. The idea that species can evolve into other subspecies, the idea that very small life forms can change over time into other things, not only do we believe it in science, not only do we have evidence of it, we have direct observation. We can watch things change. Torah has no problem whatsoever with the fact that things can change. The classic experiment of evolution, which is really more natural selection, is Darwin's finch experiment. So Darwin's looking at two sides of the Galapagos Islands. On one side, the finches have a certain beak shape, the other side another shape, same family, but they evolved different beak shapes so they could get into different crevices in the rocks. One needs a curvy beak to get into that crevice, one needs a straight one to get into that log. I'm butchering Darwin, but that's more or less what he says, is that we can watch bird beaks evolve over time. One of the classics that they teach in biology textbooks is that moths and butterflies in areas after Chernobyl, they changed the colors of their wings to better blend into the trees that were stricken by the nuclear meltdown that was over there. We certainly see evolution. We see natural selection, and it makes sense and it's true. The problem that the Torah has is with the origins of the species, which is a very small part of evolution, but also a fundamental part of it. God says in the Torah that he made the world in 6 days, and in those 6 days, he says what he made. He said one day he made birds, one day he made fish, one day he made animals, one day he made people. And he does not say that he evolved one from the next. It would require a substantial twist of Torah, something I'm not a fan of, in order to say that that's what Torah really means. The Torah really means when it says that God made birds and fish, that he made single-celled organisms that turned into birds and fish, that's obviously not really what science thinks either. Evolution's much more elegant than that. But the evolutionary theory does not match Genesis at all, as far as the origins of the species are concerned. We are completely comfortable with the idea that over the past 6,000 years, things have evolved. But another thing to note is that there is no evolutionary scheme in science that would allow that kind of evolution over the course of thousands of years. The evolution we're talking about takes hundreds of millions of years, which is time that the Torah just doesn't have. The Torah has a 6,000-year-old universe, full stop. So a lot of evolution is not compatible at all with the Torah.
How do we reconcile that as Jews?
I use the same method that I used a second ago with the miracles in the age of the universe. And that is that, once again, science describes how things would have happened had God not made a miracle, and Torah describes what actually happened because God made a miracle. So God left in the world evidence of evolution so that I would understand how to make a world myself. Meanwhile, he sped it up and did it his own way, just threw birds right in there, fully formed. But he showed me how birds could have evolved. And why do I need to know how things could have evolved? For several reasons. Some of them we use in science today. We have a researcher where I work who is involved in creating synthetic antibiotics. And the way that he creates synthetic antibiotics is he takes the data on how bacteria evolve, which is something God left in the world for us to learn from, puts that into a computer algorithm, tells it to create bacteria that never existed, who can create antibiotics that never existed, and is coming out with antibiotics that are going to soon be treating human conditions based on the principles of evolution. God left a path in the world that allows us to study the world, to study him, to study the Creator, and to make the world a better place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly how he did it. The Torah tells us that's not how he did it. But the science works. That's the whole power of this method. This method never negates the science. The science is true. It's just not an accurate description of what God practically did, but it's an accurate description of the world God practically built, which means that it has all the power.
Science has their fixed laws of how things operate, and as Jews, we believe differently. We believe in the concept of miracles, that God makes the rules, and if he wants to change the rules, well, he certainly has the power to do so. Is that one of the areas where it might appear like where science and Judaism and Torah do not fully agree?
Absolutely. I think most of the apparent problems between science and Torah come from a misunderstanding of what science is supposed to do and what Torah is supposed to do. There's a bit of a plague called science-ism. Bit of a plague. I'll tell you what I mean. There's a bumper sticker where I live that's very popular. You get this bumper sticker in a lot of places. Trust science. And it's a funny bumper sticker because almost every bumper sticker at least appeals to its base. So you put up a Republican bumper sticker. The Democrats might not love it, but the Republicans, they agree with that bumper sticker. Same thing, you put up a Democratic bumper sticker. The Democrats might like, the Republicans maybe not. There's not a scientist in the world who would say, trust me. Not a real scientist. Scientists want to show you things. They want to prove things. They want to demonstrate. But blind trust in science is alien to science. Science doesn't want blind trust. Science wants to show us the evidence and try to convince us. Torah wants blind trust because God is telling you, I made the world, this is how I did it. It's entirely different methodology. Science is describing the best available evidence for something and would love to show you its work. God is coming down to people and saying, I'm telling you exactly how I did it. That's not the same thing.
does the Big Bang, which is that's a science brand, is that congruous or incongruous with Torah and Judaism?
Totally congruous. I don't see a problem with the Big Bang at all. God frequently does things through nature. He certainly operated through nature. I believe that he broke a bit of nature while making creation, but there's no reason to believe that he didn't use a mechanism like the Big Bang. But at the same time, I would caution that something I'm very careful about with Torah and science is that Torah should avoid, and Jews should avoid, hanging their hat on science. And the reason why I say that is because science is very subject to revision. Right now, the Big Bang is very popular, but it's also embroiled in controversy. And it's not completely for sure among real physicists. I don't mean among the fringe guys. It's fair to say that in a couple of years, we might not think the Big Bang is the most plausible origin of the universe. If we spill a lot of ink proving that the Torah really thinks the Big Bang is the Big Bang, what are we going to do when the Big Bang's not the Big Bang?
So, Rabbi, earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that the Torah and Judaism is eternal. It's eternal, and that science is constantly evolving, changing, updating, from Newton to Einstein. Could you elaborate on that point, please?
Absolutely. There are two basic ways to do science, extrapolation and interpolation, big words, but I'll tell you what they mean. Extrapolation is when I imagine that I have a molecule, and this molecule, I know how it operates at the entire range from 1 degree to 100 degrees. And I know what this molecule will do from 1 degree all the way up to 100 degrees. Can I guess what it will do at 101 degrees? I think that'd be fair. Can I guess what it would do at 0? Probably fair, but it's extrapolation. Can I guess what it would do at 100 million degrees? Not really fair. No matter how good the trend line is, the further I get from the range that I can observe, the bigger my guess, the bigger my error. There's also something called interpolation. Interpolation is I know what something does at 1 degree, I know what it does at 100 degrees, and I don't know what it does at 50 degrees. When I can see both ends of something, that's called interpolation. I can guess what's in the middle, and that is usually very accurate. So when science can see both bookends of something and can look toward the middle, it's usually going to be not just right, but very difficult, almost unassailable, because we have the two bookends. Science done by interpolation is almost always going to hit the nail on the head. Science done by extrapolation is inherently a little shakier, which means not that it's wrong, it means that it needs to be taken with a grain of salt as science continues to develop. And a good deal of things regarding like the age of the universe, the age of the Earth, dating pretty much anything, is extrapolative, because we don't have a field where we can see that far back. A lot of times we're trying to extrapolate something that might have happened or might happen in the future from something happening right now, and that's inherently shaky, and science recognizes that too. It doesn't mean that it's not good science, it's great science. It does mean that they might be a little bit more blindfolded than other fields. So for Torah, which is eternal, and for God, which is correct, and something that we believe in to our very core, to have to bend that until it fits into science's pigeonhole, I don't think that's even somewhat necessary when it comes to the sciences that are not quite done being scienced yet.
Let's talk about the history of the Jews with astronomy and how we have a lot of very noteworthy Jewish astronomers. Would you please talk about these folks?
Without a doubt, the most noteworthy is going to be Rambam, and that's across all of science. He's the most noteworthy of our medical experts, the ones who dealt with medicine. He also dealt with astronomy. He was a Renaissance man, the Rambam, and he was also one of the greatest codifiers of Jewish law. He was quite a scientist. He was a personal physician to some sort of king or sultan in his area, and he was an astronomer of some note. He very closely followed the Ptolemaic model, the Aristotelian model, if you're familiar with how those work. And in his book Mishnah Torah, where he describes how Jewish law should be laid out, he has a very long and notoriously complicated section where in Hebrew, using Hebrew letters as numbers, he does all the lunar calculations, all of the solar calculations, real advanced math done in Hebrew letters on a page. It is notoriously difficult. And he gets to the right answers.
So why was it so important for our great Jewish sages to integrate science into their work?
Especially astronomy. It's been important for them because Torah exists in this world. So we can't really do Torah frequently without understanding the astronomy or understanding the science. For example, when the Torah says that doctors are given permission to heal, we do have to know how to heal. When the Torah says to make tefillin out of leather, we do have to know how to tan leather. Understand. So we do need science very frequently just to do the very basics of the Torah. The Torah demands that we calculate our months and that we calculate the cycles of the stars. As a matter of fact, it's brought in the Talmud that it's a mitzvah to learn how to calculate the trajectories of the stars, the trajectories of comets and planets, and it's a mitzvah. The language used there is mitzvah. There's a handful of codifiers of Jewish law who try to pick out the 613 commandments. One of them, known as the Smag, actually lists this as one of the 613 commandments, that every single Jew is obligated to know how to do astronomy. Practically how to match the tekufas, how to map a planet as it moves across the sky, and if not, they're missing out on one of the 613 commandments. So particularly astronomy is very near and dear to the Jewish mind.
A lot of the great scientists, astronomers like Newton and Galileo, they had connections to religion.
Yeah, sometimes difficult ones, right? Ask poor Galileo, who died under house arrest for his ideas. But yes, religion was the major funder, always. Religion, not necessarily Judaism. Religion itself has been the major funder, the major proponent, the major promoter of science up until around the medieval age, and through it, really. A lot of science owes its existence to religion, which is something people don't think about often. But a lot of our early scientists were literally full-time members of clergy. Clergymen used to be the scientists.
So Rabbi, what is the Jewish position on astrology?
Sure, so studying like star charts and figuring out what my future will be or my past or my inclinations.
Yes.
There's a long section of the Talmud that breaks it all down and says if you're born under this planet, in this house, under this star, you have these proclivities. That is mentioned in the Talmud, but then the Talmud concludes on a fascinating note, one of my favorite stories in the entire Talmud. It says that Abraham, biblical Abraham, our forefather, he didn't have any children. So he walks outside, he looks up at the sky, and he says, I don't have any children because Jupiter's in the wrong place. I was born under Jupiter, and because of where Jupiter's located, the word in the Talmud is the Talmudic word for Jupiter, to give you an idea of how long we've been looking at the sky. It says, Jupiter's in the wrong place, I can't have children. Avram einay meilid. Avram can't have kids. So God shows up. And God says to Avram, what's the problem? You're going to have kids. I gave you a blessing. You're going to have children. Avram goes, but the stars are in the wrong place. And God says, I'll move Jupiter. I'll move it. This does encapsulate the actual Jewish view on astrology, which is that astrology can, according to Jewish tradition, the stars can create certain proclivities in people. They can give people certain natures, but that we are not subject to that. We're able to conquer it.
So it's an input. It's not fixed. It's not final.
100%.
Right. So if your birthday happens to fall within Mercury and you're a little hot-tempered, that doesn't mean you're hot-tempered forever. You could always adjust because we have free will.
With the caveat that I'm not sure what Mercury does exactly. If that were to be the case hypothetically, then absolutely, it doesn't pigeonhole you. What it might do, according to the Talmud, is make you more subject to certain base urges or certain lofty urges, and that a person, when they know that, can work within that. But it certainly doesn't even begin to take away someone's free will. It doesn't take away the free will of a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person. Because since now every non-Jewish person has to keep the 7 Noahide laws, that means they have free will as well, because they can choose to keep those laws or not. As long as God's going to give people free will, and he gave the Gentiles 7 laws, that's their free will. He gave us 613, that's our free will. He can't, God doesn't take away their free will and put it in the stars. So everybody has free will, but what the stars can inform us, according to the Talmud, is what sort of problems we're going to have to deal with and what we're going to have to overcome in order to be our best selves. That is absolutely a possibility.
Well, it's a great term, but based on one example, the story you told about Abraham, it is not a good idea in Judaism to embrace fortune telling, okay? Because things are not final. That the fortune teller might tell what's going on at the moment, but that is a misnomer because the world is not final. It's not telling the future.
I will note that it's also completely forbidden. So looking at the stars to tell the future is something that we're not allowed to do at all. Looking at the stars to try to figure out what my personality might be and how I might use that to serve God, the Talmud doesn't seem opposed to that. But looking in the stars for the future, absolutely forbidden. It's one of the 613 that we don't look at the stars.
So fortune telling is not a Jewish idea?
Not even a little bit.
Okay. At the end of the day, if our viewers are stuck trying to reconcile Torah and science, what would you advise them to do?
First of all, the Torah is right. And it sometimes requires incredible bravery to stand by the Torah, especially when it doesn't look good to the society that you live in, to the people that you work with, to the people that you talk to. Judaism requires a good deal of bravery, and I think a lot of times we talk about Judaism as being this sort of militaristic bravery, like in the Hanukkah story, where you just run into battle with a sword as the few against the many. That's not what modern Jewish bravery looks like. Modern Jewish bravery is that I'm not afraid to tell my society that I respect you, I'll talk to you, and I'll work with you, but I don't agree with you. And being proud to say that the Torah does not fall in the same place as science is one of the core principles of Judaism. In the Code of Jewish Law, the very first first law in the Code of Jewish Law is don't be embarrassed in front of people who will put you down, because the world is never going to particularly like the way we see things. I think a lot of people think that Judaism only recently fell out of sync with the secular mind, that it used to be that we were ancients and they were ancients, and everybody got along until around the scientific or industrial revolution, where suddenly Torah found itself trying to play catch-up. It's not the case. Abraham was against the entire world. And when Abraham was against the entire world, ethics at the time, and science at the time, and philosophy at the time was idolatry. And he was brave enough to say, I think your science and your ethics and your philosophy is dead wrong. And they threw him into a furnace. They threw him into a furnace. It didn't go very well for him. He turned out okay. He made it out. But this is the story of Judaism forever. We've never been in step with our society, because we're eternal and we're true and we don't change. And society does change. What's popular right now might end up lining up with Torah very nicely. There are areas in which science and Torah meet completely, and areas in which science and Torah cannot agree or do not agree. We simply have to wait, first of all, for the science to catch up or for the society to shift its focus, because that does happen when you have millennia-old eyes. We're an old people. But also it requires just incredible bravery. A Jew stands up strong and proud and says, this is my people, this is my Torah, this is my faith, and I'm not going to budge on it or sacrifice it or twist it into a pretzel just because it makes my friends and my colleagues uncomfortable. That's what it is to be a Jew. That's what it is to be brave nowadays. It's a modern Maccabee. A modern Maccabee is someone who sees the contradictions between science and Torah, and perhaps not in battle, certainly not disrespectfully, but respectfully is happy to say, I'm on Team Torah when it does contradict.
When in doubt, trust the Torah.
Absolutely. That's been our faith for 6,000 years. Nothing's held us together besides the Torah. It's what we are.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.